When Officer Ray Thompson of the NYPD handcuffed the woman on the corner of 5th Avenue and 34th Street, he had no idea he was about to ignite a firestorm that would shake the department to its core and reverberate across the nation. The woman, with a quiet strength in her eyes and the calm composure of someone who had been through battles before, was not just any passerby. She was Jasmine Carter, a powerhouse influencer and a beacon for millions who had felt voiceless for far too long. What started as a routine arrest would soon unravel into a scandal that would have media outlets scrambling for coverage, social justice groups rallying, and the internet set ablaze with a single hashtag, #JusticeForJasmine. It was a crisp autumn afternoon in New York City. The streets bustled with a familiar urgency as tourists marveled at the Empire State Building, workers hurried out for their lunch breaks, and street performers added rhythm to the vibrant chaos. Jasmine Carter, dressed in an elegant cream trench coat and heels that echoed confidence with every step, navigated the sidewalks with practiced ease. Her phone buzzed continuously with notifications. Comments on her latest blog post about racial bias in mainstream media were flooding in, and her loyal followers, known as Carter's Crew, were rallying in support. Officer Ray Thompson, a tall, middle-aged cop with a military-style haircut and the hardened look of someone used to authority, stood at the corner, observing the crowd. A call had come in about a suspicious individual, matching Jasmine's description, though the tip was vague. With tensions high in the city due to recent protests against police brutality, Ray's orders were clear: investigate thoroughly but proceed with caution. But caution wasn't what followed. As Jasmine approached the crosswalk, a sudden shout from behind startled her. "Excuse me, ma'am. Stop right there." Officer Thompson's voice cut through the din, authoritative and uncompromising. Jasmine turned, confusion etching her features. Before she could respond, Ray had closed the distance, his hand already moving to his belt. "Is there a problem, officer?" Jasmine's voice was steady, though her heart pounded. Ray narrowed his eyes, his hand now on his handcuffs. "There's been a report of suspicious activity, and you match the description. I need to see your ID." Jasmine's breath caught. She knew what was happening. It wasn't the first time she'd been mistakenly singled out. But this time, in the heart of Manhattan, surrounded by bystanders and cameras, she knew she couldn't back down. "I'm not resisting," Jasmine said, her tone even but laced with defiance. "But this is harassment, and I will document every second of it." A crowd began to gather, whispers of recognition spreading like wildfire. "Is that Jasmine Carter?" "The blogger," someone muttered. Smartphones were raised, cameras clicked, and social media accounts went live. But Ray Thompson wasn't paying attention to the shifting crowd or the prying lenses. He was too focused on maintaining control. "Turn around," Ray ordered, coldly snapping the handcuffs onto Jasmine's wrists. The metal bit into her skin, and a collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Jasmine didn't struggle, but she looked Ray in the eye with a gaze that promised consequences. She was no longer just a woman being arrested. She was a symbol, and the world was about to watch what happened next. Word of Jasmine's arrest spread faster than wildfire. Within minutes, #JusticeForJasmine began trending on Twitter, fueled by eyewitness videos and posts from prominent figures who recognized her face and her story. Celebrities like Gabrielle Union and Ava DuVernay took to Instagram, voicing their outrage and calling for immediate action. News vans parked along the curb, reporters clamoring for any statement, while Thompson's superiors scrambled to manage the damage. Jasmine, now seated in the back of the patrol car, felt a mix of anger and resolve simmering within her. The small police precinct in Lower Manhattan wasn't prepared for the storm brewing on the horizon. As the car pulled up, Jasmine's eyes met those of another officer holding the door open. His expression wavered between shock and recognition. He knew exactly who she was. "Get her inside," Thompson snapped, oblivious to the officers who whispered among themselves. The hours following Jasmine's arrest turned into a media spectacle. The NYPD's Public Affairs Office was inundated with calls for statements, demands for explanations. Meanwhile, Jasmine sat in the holding cell, poised and undaunted, mentally drafting the blog post she would write once she got out. But the story would not wait for her pen. It was writing itself outside the walls of the station. Ray Thompson, sweating under the sudden heat of scrutiny, began to realize the magnitude of his actions. Reporters were interviewing eyewitnesses on the streets, including the woman who initially called in the suspicious activity report, whose shaky voice, caught on video, admitted she had felt uncomfortable seeing a well-dressed black woman looking so confident. The internet exploded with outrage. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow that barely masked the cold, unforgiving nature of the holding cell. Jasmine sat on the thin metal bench, her hands still red and marked from the tight handcuffs. She exhaled slowly, closing her eyes and centering herself. She was not going to let this break her. Not today, not ever. The officer across the hall glanced at her, recognition flickering in his eyes. He whispered to another officer, who immediately widened his eyes in disbelief. "That's Jasmine Carter, isn't it? The blogger," he muttered, low enough that only those close could hear. Rumors spread like wildfire in the station, with officers exchanging uncertain looks. They knew the kind of trouble this arrest would bring, but none of them dared to confront Officer Thompson. He was known for his stubbornness and his firm grip on authority, and that wasn't going to change now. Jasmine could hear the murmurs and the soft creak of doors opening and closing. The tension was palpable, and every second felt like a ticking time bomb. Outside the precinct, the scene was chaos. Protesters gathered as if summoned by an invisible force, signs hastily scribbled with "Justice for Jasmine" and "Stop Racial Profiling" waved high above heads. Cars honked as traffic backed up for blocks, while news anchors set up their positions, ready to broadcast live updates. Social media was ablaze, with hashtags trending and posts going viral faster than anyone could keep up. "Jasmine Carter is a voice for so many," said influencer Rachel Martinez, who had posted a video in support of her friend just minutes after the news broke. To see her treated this way is a reminder that no matter how influential, educated, or powerful we become, we are still fighting the same fight. Even members of City Council started to chime in, calling for an immediate review of police procedures. New York City's mayor, already facing criticism for handling racial issues in the city, found himself backed into a corner. Inside the precinct, Officer Ray Thompson sat at his desk, trying to tune out the commotion outside. His fingers drummed on the surface as he attempted to focus on the paperwork. He glanced at the screen of his computer where messages from his colleagues and friends flooded in, some urging him to take the situation seriously, others praising him for standing his ground. The sound of boots approaching made him look up. Captain Ramirez, a seasoned officer known for his fair but firm approach, entered with a scowl. "Thompson, in my office." "Now." Ray stood, straightening his uniform as he walked toward the captain's office. Inside, Ramirez didn't waste a moment. "Do you have any idea who you just arrested? Or the storm you've just brought down on all of us?" Ray's jaw clenched. "She matched the description, sir." "Matched the description?" Ramirez shot back, his voice rising. "Thompson, she's Jasmine Carter. Every major news outlet is outside, and half the city is demanding answers. We're not in a position to play this game." For a moment, Ray's confidence wavered, but he shook it off. "I was following protocol. Protocol or prejudice?" Ramirez's words hung in the air, sharp and unforgiving. Before Ray could answer, a commotion erupted in the hallway. Jasmine had been escorted from the holding cell to the interview room, her presence a spark that drew every eye in the station. Reporters pressed against the windows outside, cameras flashing, recording every moment as if this were the trial of the century. Jasmine sat in the interview room, facing the two officers sent to ask her a few questions. She wasn't intimidated, she'd been through worse. Her mind raced with strategies. She knew the influence she wielded, and she wasn't going to let this pass without consequence. "Miss Carter, we need to ask you a few questions about..." Before the officer could finish, Jasmine leaned forward. "You can stop there. I'm not answering anything without my attorney present." The officer shifted uncomfortably. "We're just trying to clear this up." "Then clear it up outside." "I won't speak without representation," she said, her voice calm yet firm. The officer exchanged looks with his partner before stepping out, leaving Jasmine alone for a moment. As the minutes passed, her phone, now in an evidence bag on the table, buzzed incessantly. The sounds were muffled but constant, a testament to the growing storm outside. The crowd had swelled. News anchors updated their feeds every few minutes, and high-profile civil rights attorneys had begun arriving. One, a tall man with a crisp suit and a reputation for taking on high-profile cases, stepped forward. Anthony Reese, known for his courtroom victories and fierce dedication to justice, was here for Jasmine. He pushed past the barrier with the confidence of someone who knew his rights. "I'm here for my client, Jasmine Carter," he announced, flashing his credentials at the front desk. The news spread within the precinct like wildfire. Officers exchanged nervous glances, and Thompson felt a cold sweat trickle down his back. Captain Ramirez met with Reese personally, trying to mitigate the damage. "Mr. Reese, we're trying to handle this as carefully as we can." Reese's eyes, sharp and calculating, met Ramirez's. "Captain, careful should have been practiced before one of the most influential voices in New York was dragged in here without probable cause." The conversation was short. Within minutes, Jasmine was released, stepping out into the sea of supporters. The cameras flashed as she stood next to Reese, who spoke into the microphones thrust in their direction. "We're filing a formal complaint and will pursue this to the fullest extent of the law. This isn't just about Jasmine Carter. This is about the systemic issues that have plagued communities for far too long." Jasmine met the eyes of the crowd, holding up her wrists, still marked from the cuffs. "We will not be silenced," she said, her voice carrying strength, defiance, and the promise of change. The arrest would go on to spark citywide protests and a movement that reached beyond New York. Officer Thompson faced disciplinary action and was placed on leave pending an investigation. The precinct re-evaluated its training and procedures, forced to confront uncomfortable truths that many had ignored for too long. Jasmine's blog post about the incident garnered millions of views, pushing the conversation further and bringing awareness to stories that often went untold. The caption read, "They tried to silence me, but we rose together." #Justice for Jasmine. In the weeks that followed, new policies were introduced, and training programs focused on bias and community relations were established. Jasmine continued her work, more determined than ever, knowing that change had to start somewhere, and sometimes it took one voice to ignite a revolution. The arrest that Officer Thompson thought would be just another routine check turned out to be the spark that pushed the city toward reflection and reform. And in the heart of it all stood Jasmine Carter, a woman who turned a moment of injustice into a rallying cry for millions.